I, of course, do share the concern that conscientious people have no one to vote for. If there's background noise in this video, I think it was my hearing aid. I removed it. What I recommend you do is turn off the sound and turn on the closed captions. They should be auto-captioned in an hour or so. You can follow along just by reading. And of course, I share the concern that I'm considered the joke of the enlightened. I'm not sure that anything can be done about what's happening, but it's always possible that some Upton Sinclair, if you don't know who he is, he got hold of the meatpacking industry and the fact-checking industry. He got instituted fact-checking. Some Upton Sinclair can come along and evaluate the situation well enough to intercept the railroad being used to dragoon us by RFK, Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders, Pelosi, Haley, Trumpy Toon, and Biden. I'd like to tell you, as 63 years old, what I remember about how they operated before, because a fairly good comparison between the Vietnam War strategy and the Gaza strategy is lacking. I've heard some people who are researchers say, without going into it, that both situations trace to Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. I don't know about that. I've always seen the situation as existing in Axis Hollywood. The Green Berets came out at the time. The Green Berets, I believe, were created like the Peace Corps by JFK, but John Wayne got hold of them in the weirdest movie ever made. A counterintelligence system built with the help of weasels from Star Trek. George Takei is still around, playing his game through the AIDS attack with Nancy Reagan and Freddie Mercury. And, of course, Hitler Reagan. But also Melvin Belly from Star Trek represented Jack Ruby at Dealey Plaza. And John Wayne has a picture of himself with Lee Harvey Oswald in a naval mess hall. This weird movie begins with the Green Berets singing in German. You may know that Alan Dulles wrote The Craft of Intelligence about double agents, and Eisenhower, I believe, came to suspect he was one. He was a friend of Adolf Hitler, who sat on the Warren Commission, an agent of Hitler in the United States in the CIA. Wow. The situation during the Vietnam War amounted to a paradigm of sorts. It was the idea that people who were young and foolish would laugh and say, do you really think smoking a little marijuana and refusing to enlist in this god-awful war is worse than dropping napalm on innocent villagers? Well, what we didn't see was the police blotter, the poison syndicate that was put to work by the rock industry. Working with Attica State Prison psychiatrists in Pittsburgh, they created a nerve agent. If you break the marijuana law, you get nerve deafened for life. And they fancied this a police blotter. If you look into it deeply enough, you find my article, Pitt News in the 80s, Mysticism and the Bomb. To these officers in Strongville, very heavy on loyalism to the police craft state, Really think that helping Yoko Ono fulfill a nuclear demolition, revenge attack, is in their social interest? Well, mysticism goes back to the Old Testament with some of these Reagan yokels. But it also goes back to Hitler. It comes down to the idea that, these idealists mistake their weakness is virtue, which was a Hitler idea. Hitler said strength is virtue and weakness is weakness. It dies, it gets killed. It's anti-virtue. And Hollywood is really sly in promoting that idea. There was a film called El Norte, which was about the difficult problems of Central America that Reagan was causing. And a boy had a chance to get on a flight with a Celine Dion type to fables and riches because of his talents. And he decides to stay with his bereaved sister, and they show him on a chain gang. What they don't show is that sometimes people who don't abandon others end up enriched. And that what we should be doing is making it easier for people to live valuable lives, even if they're not rich and famous. But El Norte didn't want to play that storyline. It was to escape us into the idea that a sensible person would get away from trouble rather than try to be helpful, or that people who were rich and famous are somehow magically detached. And you look at the question of what did they kill? How did they do this? How did Israel take over our police state? To help, the rich and powerful have good medical care while poisoning the rest of us, selling us genocide, Gaza. The question, what did they kill, was like Bungalow Bill, right? When Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were killed in the 60s, we didn't have leadership that said, what did they kill? When they blew their minds out in a car, the assassins said. They killed our grasp on things. They killed an alternative interpretation of El Norte, a movie with the same theme but a slightly more humane ending on both sides of the equation. Rich and famous people who weren't escapists of responsibility. I think one of the reasons why the problems with North Korea, and Russia, we can see their point of view. There's things that are reasonable to engage about them. Is the reason they're so cagey, though, is that they saw how America was deceived and manipulated into self-destruction by people like Lenin. It was, after all, a Russian skater who gave me the tip-off about Lenin's Houdini. Fourth dimensionalism. So, when you look at the situation in Gaza, you're not looking at a situation where lemmings were thrown into the good night stages of self-destruction with nothing but music, guitars, and a myth of a dead hippie for their martyrdom advisor and a swarming machine that Obama and Jeffen manipulated for entertainment. Hollywood coming to the rescue of Reagan and his right-hand man, Lenin. And for some bizarre reason, they used me for this, so I know all about it now. The Gaza plays a slightly different game than the Vietnam War does. It leads you to God. I think the person who had the highest aptitude for what was being done and might not have really understood all the details So just because these Arabs in Gaza believe in God and have faith doesn't make it right to kill them. Innocent people are being huckstered by hoodwinkers. And I think what we need to do is convince people like the Strongsville police force that they're being sold right-wing Christian mysticism by hucksters. That's not in their interest to engage this idea of Yoko Ono's that somehow karma is at work in an escalation towards revenge for Hiroshima. As though the Native American dancers of the Cheyenne were behind the Nazi rape of Nanking, where Japanese people stood bayoneting piles of Chinese people, calling it the time of their lives, the way these Israelis are operating in Gaza. Get off the San Quentin jazz of being overly intoxicated by the idea of a Roman establishment based on a police state, poisoning people as a form of law enforcement, when it's just as crooked as can be. I think there might be hope for the system of justice to take a verdict in favor of South Africa as a point of departure for the idealism of the human race to reform our civil and criminal codes so that people are accountable in an international system of justice that remains to be negotiated between Eurasia, Muslim Sharia law, Chinese law, and of course, the American Constitution. We need to negotiate these issues openly as fronts, building understanding rather than just concentrating on securing an empire. The empire builders are dealing with climate change in a less than constructive way. And they knew it was coming. So it figured in their plans. I'm just trying to show you how some of these things came about and figure in their plans.